Daniel heard that desperate cry from his fence line. Following the sound to the edge of his property, he discovered a young bobcat, tangled in wire and bristling with fear. Its golden eyes burned with raw terror as it stared at him. He could have walked away. Instead, he knelt down and took a risk that few would dare. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. This was no pet. Its growls were deep, its teeth bared in warning. But then he noticed the way its body trembled, the way its cries cracked into pitiful whimpers. Every movement felt dangerous. The bobcat hissed, claws slashing at the air. "Easy there," he whispered, his voice calm despite the danger. "I'm not here to hurt you." In that moment, he chose to help, never imagining how this single act of compassion would one day be returned. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Daniel had settled into a life defined by simple routines and the quiet rhythms of the countryside. His weathered farmhouse sat at the edge of a pine forest outside a small American town, where open pastures rolled into the shadows of tall pines, and the air carried the mingled scents of sun-baked grass and resin. He made his living repairing fences and tending gardens for his neighbors, but his passion lay with the wild things that shared his home. On weekends, he volunteered with the local wildlife rehabilitation center, helping orphaned owls find their wings and teaching curious children how to respect animals they might never see. Those years spent as a rehabber had taught him to tell the difference between a neighborhood cat's meow and the sharper cries of something untamed. It was that training that snapped him to attention one ordinary noon as he brought in a basket of clean laundry. A shrill cry pierced the humming quiet, making his skin prickle. This wasn't the soft, insistent call of a stray kitten looking for scraps. It was raw and desperate, the sound of a creature in pain. He set the basket down on the back steps, wiped his hands on his jeans, and followed the sound toward his property line, heart beating faster with every step. He found her tangled in the wire mesh of his old fence, a young bobcat no bigger than a medium-sized dog. Her tawny coat was dusted with pine needles and burrs, and her hind leg was twisted in a cruel snare of galvanized wire. Golden eyes the color of autumn leaves flashed between anger and terror. Even injured, she was all muscle and sinew, every hair bristling with wild energy. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his breath catching in his throat. He had handled hawks and raccoons in his work as a rehabber, but this was no pet. A bobcat's jaws can crush through bone. A swipe of its paw can leave a man bleeding. She hissed at him, teeth bared in a snarl, and for a fleeting second instinct told him to back away. But then he noticed the way her whole body trembled, the way her sharp cries broke into broken whimpers when she strained against the wire. She was a predator, yes, but at that moment she was a helpless being trapped in a man-made obstacle. The fence was his fence, the injury his responsibility. Memories of the rehab center came flooding back. The lectures about how many wild animals suffer because of human structures and how simple compassion can turn a crisis into a rescue. He whispered to himself, almost as if he were reciting a pledge, "Do no further harm." Standing at a cautious distance, Daniel assessed the situation the way he had been taught. The bobcat's rear leg was twisted through a gap where the mesh had pulled loose. The wire cut deeply into fur and flesh, but it hadn't yet severed muscle. The adrenaline coursing through her body would mask pain and give her the strength to lash out if he made the wrong move. He needed to free her quickly, but he also needed to protect himself and her from further injury. He retreated to his barn for supplies, grabbing a pair of thick leather welding gloves, a heavy blanket, antiseptic spray, and his well-worn fence pliers. He paused to call a friend at the rehabilitation center for advice. "Keep your movements calm and deliberate," she instructed over the phone. "Speak softly, avoid eye contact, and get the wire off as soon as you can. If you can cover her head with the blanket, she may relax enough to let you work." Her confidence bolstered him. Returning to the fence line, he crouched low, speaking in the same voice he used to soothe injured owls. "Easy there, girl," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The bobcat's ears flattened, but she did not lunge. Slowly, he extended the blanket and draped it over her head. She jerked once, claws scraping at the dirt, then went still beneath the cover. The world darkened and perhaps a little less frightening. With trembling hands, Daniel reached for the twisted wire. It bit into the leather as he pried it open with the pliers, each movement echoed by the bobcat's low growl. Sweat dripped down his brow, stinging his eyes. For a moment, he thought of letting go, calling for professional help and stepping back. But there was no time. Every second, the wire cut deeper. Taking a breath, he pressed the pliers together. With a sharp metallic snap, the strand broke, and the tension released so abruptly that he nearly fell backwards. The bobcat wrenched her leg free, stumbling a few paces before collapsing in a patch of clover. She pulled the blanket off with her teeth and swung her head toward Daniel, wild eyes searching his for a threat. Blood matted the fur around her ankle, but there was no longer any wire to hold her fast. For a tense heartbeat, he braced himself for a strike. Instead, she heaved herself upright on 3 legs, gave him a long, piercing look he would never forget, and vanished into the trees. He sank back on his heels, feeling the tremor of adrenaline fade into exhaustion. The scent of crushed earth and pine sap hung heavy in the air, and in that earthy stillness he whispered a thank you to the empty space where she had been. That night, sleep did not come easily. Daniel replayed the rescue over and over, wondering if he had done enough. He had cleaned the cut with antiseptic when she stumbled, spraying as gently as he could before she bolted. He had left a shallow dish of water and a piece of meat in the brush, though he knew better than to feed wildlife as a general rule. "Don't make them dependent," the rehab center preached. Yet he could not bear the thought of her limping through the dark woods on an empty stomach. He told himself it was a one-time offering, a lifeline thrown to a soul in need. The next morning, as the sun lifted over the pines and spilled gold light across his back lawn, he stepped outside to check his fence line. A shadow shifted beneath a stand of elderberry bushes. Golden eyes peered out at him, cautious but unmistakable. She had returned. Hunger now smoldered where raw terror had been the day before. Daniel's heart lifted and ached all at once. He moved slowly, retrieving the leftover meat from his kitchen scraps and laying it just beyond the porch. The bobcat crept forward in a crouch, muscles rippling beneath her coat, and snatched the meat with lightning speed before retreating into the undergrowth to devour it. She chewed with ferocity, as if each bite were a battle for survival. He watched from a respectful distance, marveling at the raw will to live in every movement. In the days that followed, this tentative dance continued. She would appear at dawn or dusk, hovering at the edge of his yard, and he would set out food, always a little farther from the house. He knew he was treading a dangerous line. Bobcats are solitary and territorial. Human handouts can habituate them, making them bold around people and risking their lives. At the rehab center, he had educated countless visitors about the importance of letting wildlife remain wild. Yet here he was, making an exception born of compassion. To mitigate the risk, he kept his distance, avoided making eye contact, and never attempted to touch her. He simply observed and provided, vowing to taper off as she healed. One evening, as he carried a basket of groceries from his truck, he felt a tug at the canvas. Looking down, he laughed aloud. The bobcat had nosed her way into the bag, head buried among the onions and carrots, searching for a hidden treat. She looked up at him with a clump of parsley stuck to her whiskers, and for the first time, Daniel saw the glint of playfulness. It wasn't the relaxed sprawl of a house cat. Her body remained taut, ready to flee. But there was curiosity there, a willingness to share space if only for a moment. He gently nudged her out with his foot. She hopped to the ground and sat a few yards away, washing her face like any cat might, while he returned the bruised parsley to its place and shook his head in bemused amazement. As summer melted into fall, the wounded leg knit back together. Daniel could see the muscles filling out again, the gait strengthening. He watched her test her weight, first resting, then placing more and more pressure on the once injured limb until she ran with the grace she was born to have. He no longer left meat every day. Instead, he left offerings of water near the tree line and encouraged the natural behaviors he had always advocated for. He would scatter her food across the grass so she had to search for it, or place a frozen rabbit carcass he acquired from the rehab center to simulate a hunt. At dusk, he sometimes caught glimpses of her stalking grasshoppers or leaping into the tall weeds after unseen prey, honing the skills she would need to survive when she finally left him for good. Despite his efforts to maintain that barrier, there were moments when their worlds overlapped in ways that left Daniel humbled. Once, he sat on his porch steps reading a book when the bobcat padded up silently and lay down a few feet away, paws tucked under, eyes half closed. The sinking sun painted her fur in warm hues, and for a blissful half hour they simply existed together, man and wildcat sharing the quiet. She occasionally rolled onto her back, exposing her spotted belly to the sky, then quickly righted herself with a low chuff, embarrassed by her own lapse into vulnerability. He chuckled softly, but did not reach out. Trust is a gift, not something to be grabbed. On another afternoon, he was mending the very fence that had ensnared her when he felt a presence behind him. Turning slowly, he saw her perched on a fallen log not 10 yards away, watching his every move with intense concentration. He held up his pliers for her to sniff from afar, talking all the while about the job he was doing, as if explaining to a student. The absurdity of the scene, a man giving a fencing lesson to a bobcat, was not lost on him, and yet it felt right. She blinked slowly, a gesture he had seen domestic cats use to signal calm, and he returned the blink. Maybe she was studying the thing that had once held her captive, or maybe she was simply keeping him company out of curiosity. Whatever the reason, her presence made the work less lonely. The neighborhood began to take notice of Daniel's unusual companion. A neighbor walking his dog caught a glimpse of the bobcat sitting on Daniel's porch rail and shook his head in disbelief. "You sure that's safe?" he called out over the picket fence. Daniel answered honestly, "It's not about safe or unsafe. It's about respect. I don't own her. I just helped her when she needed it. She comes and goes as she pleases." The man shrugged and walked on, the story spreading through town like wildfire. Some folks admired his courage. Others worried he was taming a predator. But Daniel stayed the course, guided by his years of education in wildlife ethics. He knew the line he walked and why he walked it. Over time, the bobcat's visits began to dwindle. The crisp days of autumn gave way to the stillness of winter, and she spent more time exploring beyond his fields. Daniel missed her but took comfort in the knowledge that this distance was good. The goal of any rehabber is always release, an animal healed and back in its habitat, not dependent on human care. He filled his days with other rescues: a baby squirrel that had fallen from its nest, a trio of ducklings separated from their mother, a barred owl that had collided with a truck. Each creature required different skills and patience. Each taught him new lessons about resilience and letting go. Yet he could not help but scan the tree line at dusk, his eyes searching for a flash of tawny fur. Then, one icy morning, he woke to find the porch empty and silent. Days turned to weeks, and she did not come. Snow blanketed the pasture, muffling sound, and the only tracks he found were those of deer and rabbits. He walked the path they had walked together, called softly into the trees, and listened to the wind answer him with silence. A knot formed in his chest, part worry, part acceptance. He had always known this was how it must end. Wild hearts cannot be caged, nor should they be. Still, the absence left a hollow that nothing else seemed to fill. He tended the fence, now repaired and reinforced, and kept a small bowl of water near the tree line out of habit, though it froze solid most nights. As winter thawed into spring, he could almost feel her ghost trotting alongside him when he checked his traps or mended a gate. Every flicker of movement in the corner of his eye made his heart jump, but each time it was only a rabbit or a fox. By summer, he had stopped expecting her altogether. Seasons rolled over one another, years piling up like folded quilts. Daniel grew a little grayer at the temples. The rehab center brought in new volunteers who had never heard of the man and the bobcat, and he told the story only when asked. It became a myth of sorts, an anecdote about how compassion can bridge the gap between species, filed away in the corners of his mind. That story could have ended there. An act of kindness returned with a few months of shared company. But nature, as Daniel would learn, has a way of completing circles we never knew were open. Late one autumn evening, as the sun bled crimson behind the hills and the first chill of winter crept into the air, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee warming his hands. The maple trees along his driveway had turned flame red, their leaves whispering secrets whenever the wind stirred. Crickets provided a steady soundtrack, punctuated occasionally by the distant bark of a coyote. He had just finished repairing a rickety barn door and was savoring the peace, his chair creaking in quiet rhythm. The memory of the bobcat still lived in the way he scanned the shadows, even if he no longer expected to see her. A rustling by the fence made him turn his head. At first, he saw nothing but darkness between the trees. Then a pair of golden eyes glowed, catching the last rays of dusk. A shape emerged, sleek, muscular, familiar. The bobcat stepped into the clearing, her coat thicker and more lustrous than he remembered. She moved with the fluid power of an adult now fully at ease in her body. His breath caught. It had been years, and yet she approached as if she had left only yesterday. Her whiskers twitched as she sniffed the air, taking in the scent of old wood and fresh coffee. Around her neck, the fur still bore a faint scar where the wire had once bitten. Daniel set his mug down slowly and rose to his feet. The world narrowed to just the space between them. "Well, look at you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You made it." She regarded him with a level gaze that held none of the fear of their first encounter. Something else shimmered there. Recognition, perhaps, or a memory stirred by the familiar figure on the porch. Without taking her eyes off him, She lowered her head and laid something gently on the top step. In the fading light, he saw it was a rabbit, freshly caught, its ears still warm. A gift, an offering, an echo of the gratitude he had felt years before when she had looked back at him through the wire. Then, from behind her, two smaller shapes wobbled into view. They were bobcat kittens, barely weaned, their paws too big for their bodies, ears tipped with the same black tufts. Their spots were more pronounced than their mother's, their eyes the same molten gold. They tumbled awkwardly over the rabbit and each other, squeaking in tiny voices, utterly unafraid. Daniel's heart swelled to the point of ache. Tears clouded his vision as he knelt slowly, careful not to startle them. He extended one hand, palm down, letting the kittens sniff his scent. They pawed at his fingers with velveted claws before darting back to their mother's side, enchanted by his presence. The adult bobcat stepped forward and brushed the side of her head against his chin, a gesture cats reserve for their most trusted companions. The touch was fleeting but spoke volumes. A bridge stretched across years and species, anchored in a moment of shared vulnerability. Daniel pressed his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. The smells of pine and fir and damp earth filled his senses, while the world outside that small connection blurred away. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, unsure whether he was thanking her for the rabbit, for the trust, or for coming back at all. Perhaps all three. They stayed together for only a few minutes. Wild creatures do not linger where humans gather, not if they are to survive. The kittens explored the porch, pouncing on fallen leaves, batting at his shoelaces, squealing in high pitches that made him laugh. Their mother watched with ears swiveling, every muscle ready to spring if danger appeared. When she deemed the visit long enough, she let out a low growl that rounded up her babies instantly. They scrambled back to her, each pressing aside against her strong legs. She gripped the rabbit in her jaws again and turned to leave. At the edge of the clearing, she paused and looked over her shoulder, eyes gleaming like twin embers. It was the same look she had given him after he freed her from the fence years ago, but this time it was layered with something richer. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or gratitude for the second chance he had helped provide. Daniel watched until the last swish of her tail disappeared into the shadows. He remained on his knees long after the darkness swallowed the family, tears drying on his cheeks, heart pounding with a mixture of joy and longing. He whispered a blessing into the night air, hoping the wind would carry it into the forest. Then he rose, picked up his mug of coffee, now cold, and sat back down in his chair. The porch boards creaked under his weight as he leaned back and let out a long, trembling breath. The story had come full circle, but the feeling it left within him stretched forward, expansive and bright. Inside the rehab center, Daniel would later tell the volunteers about the visit. Young faces lit up with wonder as he described the bobcat's return and the way her kittens played at his feet. He emphasized the ethical tightrope he had walked, how he had avoided habituating a predator while still offering aid, how he respected the animal's wildness, how he never tried to domesticate her. He shared his belief that compassion does not mean control, that sometimes the best way to love a wild thing is to let it go. The story became more than a tale of a man and a bobcat. It became a lesson in humility, stewardship, and trust. Years later, whenever Daniel stepped onto his porch at dusk, he would feel the faintest echo of those soft paws and the brush of whiskers against his chin. He kept repairing fences and hauling laundry, kept volunteering at the rehab center, kept telling the story to anyone who would listen. He also kept an eye on the tree line, knowing that while the bobcat and her kittens might never return again, there would always be other wild creatures in need of kindness. Each one would carry a story of its own, each one an opportunity to remember that our backyard fences intersect with the living, breathing world beyond.